What you're about to read should stop you in your tracks because it reveals how a state famous for innovation somehow engineered a fuel crisis in plain sight. This isn't a story about one gas station or one city. It's a story about how scarcity is created, protected, and defended, while regular people pay the price every time they pull up to the pump. Picture Northwest Fresno, a stretch of land that city officials believed could become a lifeline for working families. The plan wasn't small, it wasn't cautious, it was bold. A massive Costco warehouse, nearly twice the size of a normal big box store, anchored by something even more important, a 32 pump fueling station. Not 8 pumps, not 12, 32, the kind of setup you usually see near airports designed to move cars quickly and keep fuel flowing. For Fresno residents, this wasn't just another retail project, it was relief. Costco's strategy was simple and brutal to competitors: sell gas at a loss, undercut the market by 50 cents, sometimes a full dollar per gallon. Costco didn't need to make money on fuel. Cheap gas was bait. Families would come for the fill-up and leave with carts full of groceries, school supplies, and household essentials. The math worked instantly. A single fill-up could save a household $10 to $20. Over a year, that meant $500 to $1,000 back in people's pockets. Real money, rent money, grocery money, money that didn't disappear into a fuel tank. City analysts ran the numbers and saw something even bigger. That empty parcel of land, barely valued at $1 million, would jump to nearly $100 million once the project was built. Property taxes alone would pour millions into schools, roads, fire departments, and basic services Fresno constantly struggles to fund. Construction would inject roughly $150 million into the local economy, hundreds of union jobs during the build, permanent jobs once it opened, a last-mile delivery hub to support Fresno's growing dependence on online shopping. This wasn't a gamble. Costco had been part of Fresno for decades. It wasn't some fly-by-night developer. City council members saw a rare alignment: lower gas prices, job creation, tax revenue, and infrastructure investment, all in one package. The votes were ready. The approvals were lined up. Fresno was about to say yes. Then the lawsuit hit. Within weeks of final approval, everything froze. The gas station that could have eased prices across the region, the warehouse that could have anchored long-term growth, all of it slammed into a legal wall. A group called the Herndon Riverside Coalition for Responsible Planning and Development filed suit, claiming the city's environmental review was flawed. On paper, it sounded technical: zoning issues, traffic concerns, climate analysis. But as the case unfolded, a different pattern began to emerge, one that went far beyond Fresno. At the heart of the lawsuit was a 47,000 square foot delivery warehouse, labeled an accessory use to the main Costco store. The coalition argued it wasn't accessory at all. They said it looked like a standalone industrial facility, something not allowed under the site's zoning. That argument alone gave the lawsuit traction. But the real knockout punch came from the city's climate analysis. Fresno had relied on its 2021 Climate Action Plan to declare the project's greenhouse gas impact less than significant. There was just one problem: that plan had already been thrown out by a court months earlier. It no longer had legal standing. When the judge reviewed the record, the conclusion was blunt. The city's environmental impact report leaned on a plan that didn't legally exist. There was no proper analysis to back up its claims. Traffic and stormwater issues were noted, but they weren't decisive. The core problem was structural. The approval process itself was broken. After 2 years of delays, hearings, and legal maneuvering, the ruling came down in July 2025. Every approval Fresno had granted was wiped out. The project was stopped cold. The city could start over or appeal, but time was already running out. Costco's lease at its existing location was set to expire in just months. Without certainty, the risk became too high. What could have been Fresno's biggest fuel relief project ever was reduced to paperwork and an empty lot. And this is where the story stops being about Costco and starts being about California. Because while Fresno fought its courtroom battle, hundreds of smaller gas stations across the state were quietly being pushed toward extinction. the silent shutdown of family-owned gas stations. While headlines focused on big developments and lawsuits, a quieter crisis was spreading across California's neighborhoods. It didn't involve billion-dollar corporations or massive warehouses. It involved families. A new state mandate required gas stations with single-walled underground storage tanks to replace them with double-walled systems by January 1st, 2026. The goal sounded reasonable: prevent leaks, protect groundwater, improve safety. The cost was anything but reasonable. The average retrofit price? Nearly $2 million per station. For large chains, that's painful but manageable. For independent stations, it's a death sentence. Most mom-and-pop gas stations survive on razor-thin margins, often clearing around $50,000 a year in profit before unexpected repairs, before payroll increases, before rising utility costs. There was no way to absorb a $2 million mandate. The state offered assistance through a loan and grant program, but the process moved at a glacial pace. Applications sat for months, then years. Contractors capable of doing the work were booked solid long before approvals came through. A Korean-American family who had operated the same station for 30 years waited nearly 2 years for a response. When it arrived, it was too late. No contractors available, no clear funding path. A Mexican immigrant couple running an Arco station faced the same outcome. Paperwork filed, environmental tests paid for, silence from the state as the deadline crept closer. An Indian family whose station had passed through 3 generations hit the same wall: delays, denials, no answers. By early 2026, hundreds of independent stations were red-tagged and forced to shut down, not because they leaked fuel, not because they were unsafe, but because compliance was financially and administratively impossible. Entire communities lost their only nearby fuel source overnight, and the consequences were immediate. Fire departments in rural Fresno County suddenly had to drive 20 miles just to refuel. Ambulances mapped their routes around the few remaining stations. School districts shortened bus routes. Emergency response times stretched longer, not because of disasters, but because fuel access vanished. These weren't theoretical risks. They were daily realities. The closures left behind empty lots, cracked asphalt, faded signs, no plan to replace what was lost, just silence. At the same time, something even bigger was happening. California's fuel supply itself was shrinking. Refineries shut down, supply tightens, prices explode. On New Year's Eve 2025, another domino fell. A major refinery in Los Angeles shut down for good, wiping out roughly 8% of California's gasoline production overnight. A facility that had operated for over a century was gone. What it left behind wasn't a clean transition. It left contaminated land, chemical pollution, and cleanup costs with no clear funding source. Around the same time, other energy companies began pulling back. Billions of dollars in assets were put up for sale. Corporate headquarters moved out of state. Investment dried up. Fewer refineries meant less competition. Less competition meant more concentrated control over supply. And when supply tightens in a state that already imports much of its fuel, prices don't just rise, they spike. Drivers in Fresno began comparing gas prices like stock tickers. One station at $5.29 a gallon, another cheaper option 30 miles away. The catch? The round trip burned several gallons just to save a few cents per gallon. The irony was impossible to ignore. Policies designed to reduce emissions were forcing people to drive farther, burn more fuel, and create more pollution. Analysts warned the system was reaching a breaking point. With no new refineries planned, no major fuel infrastructure permitted, and closures accelerating, predictions once dismissed as fear-mongering started sounding realistic. $8 a gallon, $10, $12. For working families, the crisis wasn't abstract. It showed up in budgets, commutes, and emergency delays. The system was failing, not because of war or natural disaster, but because policy after policy narrowed supply without replacing it. And the Fresno Costco project? It suddenly looked less like a local dispute and more like a symbol. Scarcity by design, and the question no one wants to answer. The empty lot in Fresno tells the story better than any press release ever could. A place where 32 pumps could have eased pressure across an entire region sits vacant. $15 million a year in tax revenue never arrived. Families who could have saved hundreds each year continue paying premium prices. Across California, former gas station sites sit fenced off and abandoned. No replacement plan, no transition strategy, just fewer options and higher costs. Policymakers insist the process is working. They point to environmental protection, legal compliance, long-term goals. But on the ground, the results tell a different story. Supply is shrinking, demand isn't, prices rise, access falls. This isn't about ideology, it's math. When both small family stations and large-scale relief projects face the same legal and regulatory barriers, scarcity becomes inevitable. And scarcity always hurts the same people first: working families, small business owners, and emergency responders. So here's the question that hangs over all of this. When the last independent station closes, when the last refinery leaves the state, when fuel hits $12 a gallon and help arrives too late, will anyone be held accountable? Or will Californians be told this was simply the cost of progress? That answer is still being written. And right now, the people paying the price don't get a say in the script. What do you think is really driving this crisis? Environmental protection or something else entirely?